Yes, yet another Jordan Peterson episode, but for those of you who hate Jordan Peterson and see no value in him, I hope you'll get something out of this episode. And don't worry, we're not going to be showing copious footage of Peterson crying over his influence as a culture warrior's Tony Robbins.
It's certainly not just happiness. It's better than happiness, but it's almost unbearable.
No, I want to try and show you why intelligent people once loved Peterson and had high hopes for him. I want to show you Peterson before his dramatic and progressive transformation into a caricature of a comic strip supervillain. It's hard to believe it today, but Jordan Peterson was once interested in bridging the cavernous polarities in the culture. And not only was he interested, but he wrote what I can only describe as my favourite manifesto ever, articulating what this looks like. I was going to say the psychology or philosophy of it, but the manifesto is so laced with metaphor that it would be misleading to call the document by any of these terms. This is something that any integral or meta-modern thinker is going to absolutely love. It's a strange paper that he wrote back in 2005, called Peacemaking Among Higher Order Primates, for a collection called A Psychology of Resolving Global Conflicts, published by a respected academic publishing house. The fact that this article was published in a serious collection for a respected publisher adds another layer of curiosity to the whole thing. Here's some taster lines so you can see what I mean. The truly idealistic man is an avatar of the reality of the unknown, and not a loser masquerading in moral dress. The peacekeeper must feel his way. To feel one's way is to make intimate contact with the unknown, and to risk the contamination that intimate contact may bring. The forges of the gods exist in the transcendent domain beyond the local. The peacekeeper must have subjected himself to the heat and pressure of these forges, must have become something hard and translucent in consequence, but also something protean and subtle. Gemstones shine most brightly out of the darkness, not the light. You can probably already grasp the general meaning of this piece just from those snippets. There's something of the Peterson we know in here, especially for those of us who know and love the maps of meaning Peterson. It's harder to believe it's the same man who in the past few months has written things like, Hamas will never win over the righteous keepers of the West. Up yours, scum. Oh look, butchering children too young to give informed consent when there is substantial money on the table might be wrong. Physicians appear stunned. Prison. It's always best to sterilize and mutilate the Sincerely, Satan. Nibbled to death by ducks, in this case dead ducks, at 60 Minutes will die at its own hand like all legacy media, at Elon Musk. Prison! As we'll see, it's not just a difference in eloquence that's so surprising here, but it's amazing just how much someone can change in 18 years. This is not a person that anyone aspires to be. This is a man hooked to the social media site that has reduced him to an addicted animal reacting in real time and unable to quit. But more on that in the episode on X/Twitter as an anti-everything good about human evolution platform. But now, let's dive into peacemaking among higher order primates, and let's talk about one of my favourite papers ever. The 2005 article is essentially a game of opposites, in which Peterson introduces two opposite domains, and then goes on to map them out in contrast to each other. These opposites are clearly related to Peterson's concepts of order and chaos, which Maps of Meaning is all about. We have the local domain and the transcendental domain, which are essentially more concrete versions of order and chaos. We have the local victor, who is the successful one in the local, and the peacemaker, who is successful in the ways of the transcendental. Where it gets interesting, and where Peterson runs into a bit of difficulty that I think foreshadows his development into what he has become, is the relationship between the peacemaker and the local loser. We'll circle back to this later on, but I just want to put a flag in it for now because their similarities, I think, is at the core of the developmental arc of Jordan Peterson, the tragic hero, that we'll be exploring in more depth in the next episode. So we have the local and the transcendental, each with their own flavour of victor. Now, the relationship between the local and the transcendent can be thought of as the relationship between islands and the ocean. As Peterson describes it, the transcendent space that surrounds all local environments. This transcendental space goes by a number of different names in the article. It's no man's land, terra incognita, strange lands, uncharted seas, and the most general of all, the unknown. The local, on the other hand, is the land of status, dominion, material possessions, charisma, sexual potency, and value. It's the competitive space where we will find local values like patriotism cropping up. Where the transcendental is a domain characterized by meaning, the local is the domain characterized by rationality. This is a good time to point out that Peterson's ideas of the local and the transcendental map over really well with Victor Turner's distinction between structure and communitas/liminality, which we've talked about so much on the channel in the past. And it also maps over really well with Ian McGilchrist's characterization of the left and right hemispheres, which we'll be talking about in serious depth at some point on the channel. The local is also known as established territory. In contrast with the transcendental, the local is the known. It's a paradigm that's already established. It's the ready-made tablet of values handed to you by society. With the local, you're told, here is the game, here are the rules, now go try and win. Get yourself a lot of money, a hot wife or husband, get yourself a big house and a nice car, and be master of your domain. In the local, you take for granted that the game works and that you want to win it. The thing is to win the game, not to question it. If the Soviets or the Chinese are your enemy, then you don't go questioning this program, you take it for granted. Your role as an individual in the local isn't to question the value of the local, but to thrive in it. If you're a local leftist, you take it for granted that fascism is the devil's own ideology, that capitalism has destroyed human life, and that the globalized neoliberal economy is destroying the global ecosystem. Meanwhile, if you're a local alt-right kid, you take it for granted that the alphabet people are trying to indoctrinate your children, that leftists have taken over academia in order to bring Western society down with their cultural Marxism, that the deep state is out to get you, and that Klaus Schwab is going to take everything you own. Once you take these as the rules of the game, you know who your enemy is, you know how to behave, and you know what labels to use to keep people from straying too far from the local dogmas. This brings us onto Peterson's core argument insofar as he has one. While most of the 8-page article is a poetic amplification of the differences between the local victor and the peacemaker, he does have a point which he starts and ends with, and which crops up a couple of times in between. His argument is that what separates these local domains isn't simply opinions. We can call these individuals and groups living in different domains antagonists, which is what they are in the culture wars anyway if we think of left and right. Or we can call them international and ideological if we think of the Cold War distinction between communist and capitalist. We could also think of the distinction between the aristocracy and the republicans in the lead up to the French Revolution, or the Christians and Muslims in the Crusades or in the 21st century war on terrorism. In all of these cases, there's an us and them, and never shall the twain meet. So Peterson is saying that these aren't simply differences of opinion. The facts themselves are different to these different groups. As Peterson puts it, the basis for the disagreement is so profound that the world arrays itself differently for each antagonist. He goes on to say that there are an infinite array of facts, and that array manifested itself only in part to each individual or to each culture, and that this primal infinite array was filtered idiosyncratically or ethnocentrically, so that the world thereby derived was idiosyncratically or ethnocentrically unique, and not merely as a matter of opinion. All of this is phrased in terms of rhetorical questions, though it is clearly Peterson's opinion that this is the case, given his work in maps of meaning. This is even more true when we come to the next part, which forms the crux of his argument. What if it was motivation itself, lurking unseen behind both vision and thought, that constructed that filter, letting in light here but not there, and now but not then? What if the facts would not come into alignment between antagonists until they wanted the same thing? There's a lot to unpack here, but for a start, it's worth asserting that there are a number of different angles that fit with this Petersonian idea of fact worlds. There's Foucault's idea of the epistemes from his 1966 work, The Order of Things, which is very similar to Thomas Kuhn's work a couple of years earlier in 1962's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. To put it very simply, Kuhn's paradigm is a sort of bubble that scientists in a certain field live in. Scientists working in a certain paradigm share a particular foundation worldview which orients them towards certain problems and certain forms of solution. Science then isn't a linear progression towards absolute truth, but an evolutionary process in which we have better and better models of the world, but which will always remain models. When Einstein's paradigm of general relativity superseded the Newtonian paradigm, it wasn't a simple switch in which there was only addition. Something changed in that shift. The cosmos itself was completely transformed. Where before we had a static space in which everything ever had simply played itself out in this vast cosmic box, the Einsteinian paradigm inhabited a different cosmos in which space and time were bound up together in the famous space-time continuum. These are different universes. Something was lost, something was gained. And in the field of chemistry, the same thing happened when Lavoisier made his great discovery that oxygen was the cause of combustion. Before Lavoisier, chemists believed that a substance called phlogiston was causing combustion. This phlogiston helped the chemists of the time model what was going on and was central to the field of chemistry at the time, but with the work of Lavoisier, it was lost. If you want to learn more about Kuhn's work, I made a couple of videos on it a couple of years back that are well worth a watch. And so, when Peterson is talking about different fact worlds, he's not off with the fairies, but has good philosophical underpinnings. An even better map over than this one with Foucault or Kuhn is with the work of economist Thomas Sowell in his book A Conflict of Visions, which we also made an episode on back in 2022. In this work, Sowell introduces the concept of a vision, which is like a sociological version of the scientific episteme or paradigm. Pretty sure Peterson must have read A Conflict of Visions because his version of this fact world fits perfectly with Sowell's idea of a vision, which he describes in A Conflict of Visions as follows. Visions are like maps that guide us through a tangle of bewildering complexities. Like maps, visions have to leave out many concrete features in order to enable us to focus on a few key paths to our goals. In the book, Sowell focuses on two visions in particular that have been butting heads for centuries. He calls them the constrained and the unconstrained visions. These maps of the world have fundamentally different outlooks on human nature, which leads them to completely different positions on basically every political, social, and economic point. These visions live in such different worlds that the same words mean different things to them. Sowell looks at these different usages of words like justice, equality, freedom, and merit. To give just one example, let's see what he says about freedom. In contrast to the constrained vision, which seeks to analyse, prescribe, or judge only processes, the unconstrained vision seeks to analyse, prescribe, or judge results, income distribution, social mobility, and equal or unequal treatment by a variety of institutions, for example. All of this fits neatly with Peterson's argument in Peacemaking that, ridiculous surely, how can the facts themselves differ when it is one world that we all inhabit? But the facts do differ, because the world is complex beyond the scope of any one interpretation. Before we talk about the Peacemaker, can I interest you in a transformative community looking to bring peace to the world? You can be part of our book club where we read some philosophical classics like Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground, which we've just finished reading. You'll also get access to these episodes early and to bonus episodes like book reviews, livestream Q&As, and interviews with other creators and experts. All of this only on Patreon, where we're making a community to transform ourselves and the world. What's not to love? And this is where the Peacemaker comes on stage. If antagonists live in different worlds, that is because they are looking at the facts in different ways. And this is the root of their conflict. But to invert what he said earlier, the facts would come into alignment between antagonists when they wanted the same thing. And this is the role of the Peacemaker. As Peterson put it, the job of the Peacemaker is to establish an accord that allows the facts themselves to become a matter of agreement. The various fact worlds are simplified maps of an unimaginably complex world. They are crystallizations of one way of interpreting these facts. These interpretations have become fact worlds, islands of established territory that have been dredged from the ocean to form antagonistic islands. Well then, Peterson argues, why can't we go back into that ocean? Back into the transcendental domain of the unformed primal unknown out of which all local domains emerge, and find a greater interpretation of the facts which can bring these antagonists into the same, now expanded, local domain. And this is the exact climax that Peterson's article ends with. The Peacemaker sees new facts and communicates them to the antagonists, and the antagonists, blessed with the eyes of the Peacemaker, come to see their enemies for the first time. Guided implicitly in this manner, they may rise above their own desire for victory and their own subjugation to defeat and seek peace. The role of the Peacemaker then is to find the facts that bring peace. The majority of the article is clarifying what the characteristics and outlook of the Peacemaker are. These are qualities like curiosity, courage, humility, listening, comfort with uncertainty, patience, disregard for self and status, and faithfulness. The Peacemaker is a citizen of no country, since this would compromise his integrity and make his success partial. The Peacemaker is like a diamond, hard and yet translucent, shining out of the darkness even better than light itself. And of course, the Peacemaker is a master of meaning. So for long-time viewers of the channel, you probably already know why I love this article so much. In the channel update, I was talking about why I've been so immersed in leftism the last couple of years, making videos on continental philosophy, from semiotics and structuralism to Foucault and Baudrillard, and in the pipeline we've got another big video on Marx and one on critical race theory. And I think the reason for all this was that I was just so taken with Ken Wilber's integral vision. I think I was just infected by it and driven by it. The Hegelian Marxian developmental pattern of spiral dynamics, which is one of the key elements of Wilber's later work, is like psychedelics. It's dangerously intoxicating and to be consumed in moderation. But I attribute a lot of my Peacemaker bug to that. I did a video on spiral dynamics in the first 100 days of videos, but it was quite an impromptu affair, and in a comical move, I sped the whole thing up to 1 1/4 speed before uploading it because I thought it was too long, or I was talking too slow, or I don't know. It was crazy. In hindsight, it was crazy. This hunger for peace lies at the heart of the integral and meta-modern movements. Wilber talks about the food fight among a lot of these different stages, and about the role of integral as listening to the various levels and potentially harmonizing between them. I think a lot of the time these schools end up falling into danger that Peterson talks about at the start of the Peacemaker, where he asks, what if the disagreement extends beyond the antagonist to the Peacemaker, who sees the fact themselves in a manner that neither antagonist can accept? Peterson, as far as I know, is completely unacquainted with Wilber's work, and after this article, you can see why there was a lot of disagreement 5 or 6 years back about whether Peterson was at the integral stage or not. For good exploration of that, I'd highly recommend David Fuller's interview with Ken Wilber for Rebel Wisdom. What's really quite interesting is to see the convergence of Peterson with the integral/meta-modern vision, and separately the convergence of both with Ian McGilchrist's work on the two hemispheres of the brain. Aside from the peacemaking vision itself, which resonates so deeply with those integral and meta-modern sensibilities in me, there's something else that really stuck with me from this article. The thing that screamed at me while I was reading it is, what the fuck happened? Where did Peterson go so wrong? How did he go from being the Peacemaker traveling the strange lands of the transcendental, seeking the facts that lead to peace, to becoming the most petty and parochial of all culture warriors? It's an astounding transformation that I've decided to dedicate a whole other episode on Jordan Peterson to, and I'd love to write a play or something about it, because it's almost the exact story of the tragic hero as Aristotle mapped it out in his works. In that episode, I'm going to explore this Petersonian arc of the tragic hero and compare it to some fantasy and sci-fi stories that I love from Brandon Sanderson and also Frank Herbert's Dune. If that's something that tickles your fancy, you can check it out now on Patreon, or for those of you living in future times, I'll link to the episode here. For now though, that's everything for this episode of The Living Philosophy. As ever, I'd like to sing to high heavens the praises of David Pelabosian and Sasha Canton, whose contributions do so much to keep the lights on around here, and to all the other patrons. For those of you who've been tuning in recently, you'd be well aware that this is the year of Patreon, and so if you want to get involved in a community dedicated to making peace, to finding nuance and becoming the best versions of ourselves, and join us for our book club, or if you just like to get early access to episodes and access to bonus content like book reviews and Q&As, or indeed if you just want to support the quest of peacemaking and get your name in the credits like these wonderful people, then you can head over to Patreon. Otherwise, I shall see you next time. Thank you for watching.